Hey everyone, welcome back to Moonville. Tonight we're going through some suspense horror type stories. The first one is, don't look at the mannequins if they move. I, 28M, am currently sitting in a parked car outside a lawyer's office, hands shaking, trying to process how a minimum wage security gig at a dead mall turned into the systematic destruction of my entire family dynamic. 3 months ago, I was desperate. My father had just invested the entirety of my late mother's inheritance, money meant for my younger brother's medical school, into a failing luxury car rental business. He didn't ask. He just did it. When I confronted him, he told me I was being emotionally small and that I needed to support his vision. I was broke, my brother was staring at a tuition bill he couldn't pay, and the only place hiring immediately was the Jefferson Ridge Mall. The mall had been closed for 2 years. It was a concrete tomb. The hiring manager was a twitchy guy who didn't even look at my resume. He just handed me a laminated sheet of paper and said, "The pay is triple the state average because nobody stays. Follow the rules, especially Rule 4, and you'll get your paycheck." Rule 4 was typed in bold, red ink. The mannequins in the north wing stayed behind the glass. If you see one on the walkway, do not look at it. Do not acknowledge it. Walk back to the security office and wait for the 3 a.m. chime. I thought it was a prank, some hazing ritual for the new guy. I needed the money too badly to care. My father was already calling me every day, not to ask how I was, but to demand I loan him more money to cover the interest on his business loans. He was becoming increasingly entitled, acting as if my meager paychecks were part of his personal treasury. "I'm your father," he told me when I refused the first time. "I gave you life. The least you can do is ensure this family name stands for something. Don't be selfish, son. Your brother can wait a year for school. My business can't wait a week." I started the night shift on a Tuesday. The mall was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy in your ears. I stayed in the South Hub for the first 4 hours, scrolling through my phone, ignoring texts from my father's new wife, my stepmother, who was now messaging me lists of household expenses she expected me to cover since my father was temporarily illiquid. At 2 a.m., I did my rounds. I entered the north wing. The moonlight hit the glass of a high-end department store that had been gutted years ago. Only the mannequins remained. 6 of them, draped in dusty, tattered evening wear. I flashed my light over them. They were pale, featureless, and perfectly still. I turned my back to check the service door. When I turned back, there were 7. One was standing in the middle of the carpeted walkway. It was wearing a tuxedo that looked remarkably like the one my father wore to his second wedding. My heart stopped. I remembered Rule 4. Don't look at it. I stared at my boots. My pulse was a hammer in my chest. I backed away, keeping my eyes locked on the floor. The sound of plastic scraping against the floor echoed through the atrium. Scrape. Step. Scrape. It was following me. I made it back to the office, locked the door, and waited for the 3 a.m. chime. When it rang, I checked the monitors. The walkway was empty. The next morning, I went home to sleep, but there was no rest. My father and stepmother were waiting in my kitchen. They had used their spare key. The one I specifically told them was for emergencies only. "We need 40,000, my father said, not even looking up from his coffee. "I don't have $40,000, I said, leaning against the door frame, exhausted. "You have that trust fund your mother left in your name for contingencies," my stepmother chimed in, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness she used when she wanted something. "This is a contingency. If your father loses the business, we lose the house. You wouldn't let your parents be homeless, would you?" "That money is for my brother's education," I said, "and it's legally protected. I'm the sole trustee." "No." My father stood up, his face reddening. "I'm the head of this house. That money belongs to this family. I've already spoken to a family law attorney. Since the funds were commingled in a joint account briefly after your mother passed, I have a claim. You can give it to us now, or we can take it in court and leave you with nothing." He was lying. I knew the law. Under U.S. inheritance statutes, specifically in our state, an inheritance remains separate property unless I voluntarily gift it to the marital estate or commingle it beyond recognition. I had kept it in a high-yield solo account, but his entitlement was staggering. He was willing to sue his own son to fund a fleet of Maseratis he couldn't lease. "Get out," I said. "Fine," my father hissed. But don't expect a dime from the estate when I'm gone. You're dead to this family. I went back to the mall that night, fueled by a mix of terror and pure, cold rage. I realized then that the mannequins weren't the most dangerous things in my life. At least the mannequins had rules. My father had none. The second night at the mall felt different. The air was colder, smelling of ozone and wet wool. I sat in the security booth, staring at the grainy black and white monitors. My father's threat of a lawsuit weighed on me. I knew that under the Uniform Transfers to Minors Act, UTMA, and the specific probate laws of our state, he didn't have a leg to stand on, but that wouldn't stop him from filing a frivolous suit to freeze the assets. He knew that if the funds were tied up in litigation, my brother would miss the tuition deadline. He was using time as a weapon. Around 1:15 a.m., I saw movement on camera 4. It wasn't a mannequin. It was a person. I grabbed my radio and headed toward the north wing. As I rounded the corner by the old fountain, I saw her, my stepmother. She was wearing a heavy coat and carrying a crowbar. She was standing in front of the department store entrance, peering through the glass. "What are you doing here?" I shouted. She jumped, nearly dropping the crowbar. Her face twisted from shock into that familiar mask of entitlement. "You changed the locks on the house, you little brat. Your father is beyond livid. He knows you keep the trust documents in your floor safe. He figured you'd be too scared to leave them at home while we have a key, so you probably brought them here. You broke into a closed mall to steal legal documents?" I was stunned. "That's breaking and entering. That's a felony." "Oh, please," she scoffed, waving the crowbar. "Who's going to report me? You? We're family. Besides, your father says this mall is practically abandoned. He's already calling the precinct commander. They play golf together. This goes away with one phone call. Now, tell me where you hid the bag." I looked past her. Behind the glass of the department store, the 6 mannequins were gone. The display was empty. "You need to leave," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Right now. Go back the way you came." "Not without that money," she snapped. She stepped closer to me, her eyes darting around the shadows. "You think you're so smart, protecting your brother. Your brother is a loser. Your father is a visionary. If you don't give us the access codes, we'll tell the police you've been stealing equipment from this job. We've already placed a few missing items in your trunk. Your father has friends, remember?" The level of calculated deceit made my blood run cold. They hadn't just come for the money. They had set a trap to destroy my reputation if I didn't comply. Scrape. Step. Scrape. The sound came from the darkness behind her. She didn't hear it, or she chose to ignore it. "Did you hear me?" she yelled. "I'm talking to you. Behind you." I whispered. She turned around, swinging her flashlight. The beam hit a mannequin standing 3 feet away. It was tall, wearing a wedding veil that was yellowed with age. It wasn't moving, but it was closer than it had been a second ago. "So what?" "It's a doll," my stepmother hissed. She turned back to me, but as she did, the mannequin's head snapped 45 degrees to the side. Its plastic neck made a sound like breaking glass. My stepmother froze. She saw it that time. "What was that?" "Rule 4, I said, backing away. "Don't look at them. Don't acknowledge them. Don't play games with me," she screamed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. She turned and swung the crowbar at the mannequin's head. The metal struck the plastic with a dull thud. The mannequin didn't fall. It didn't even wobble. Instead, its plastic hand reached out, slowly, deliberately, and gripped the crowbar. My stepmother pulled. It didn't budge. She let out a whimpering sound, her entitlement vanishing in an instant. "Help me," she gasped. I wanted to. Every instinct in me told me to grab her hand and run. But then I remembered the missing items in my trunk. I remember my brother's face when my father told him he was useless. I remembered that she had come here to rob me of my mother's legacy. "I can't," I said. "I have to follow the rules." I turned my eyes to the floor. I didn't look back as I heard her scream. It wasn't a long scream. It was cut short by the sound of heavy, plastic limbs moving in unison. I walked straight to the security office, my heart hammering against my ribs, and I locked the door. I sat there, staring at the clock. 2:15 a.m., 2:20 a.m. At 2:45 a.m., the monitors flickered. All of them showed the north wing. My stepmother was gone. The crowbar was lying on the floor, twisted into a perfect U shape. The mannequins were back in their display window. But there weren't 6 anymore. There were 7. The new one was at the back, dressed in a heavy coat, its plastic face molded into a permanent expression of absolute terror. At 3 a.m., the chime rang. I didn't call the police. Not yet. I knew if I did, my father's friends in the department would twist the narrative before the ink on the report was dry. Instead, I waited until my shift ended at 6 a.m. I drove straight to a different precinct, 3 towns over, where my father's reach didn't extend. I told them my stepmother had followed me to work, harassed me about a family legal dispute, and then disappeared into the mall. I conveniently left out the mannequins. I told them she seemed unhinged and erratic. When the police arrived at the mall, they found her car in the lot. They searched the building for hours. They walked right past the North Wing display. They saw the 7 mannequins, but to them, they were just dusty plastic. They didn't notice that one was wearing a high-end designer watch, the exact one my father had bought my stepmother with my mother's money. The police classified her as a missing person. But my father? He didn't grieve. He was terrified. He called me that afternoon, his voice cracking. "Where is she? I know you did something. She went there to get those papers, and she never came back. She tried to rob me, Dad." I said, my voice dead calm. "She told me you planted stolen goods in my trunk. I'm a mechanic right now having my car detailed. Anything that wasn't mine is being handed over to the state troopers as found property from your house." There was a long silence. He knew his leverage was gone. The stolen goods trick had backfired. Now, he was the primary suspect in his wife's disappearance. In the eyes of the law, a husband with massive debt and a missing wife is the first person you look at. "You're going to tell the police we're on good terms," he commanded, trying to regain his entitled posture. "You're going to say she was depressed. If I get investigated, the business dies, and you get nothing. I already get nothing, remember? You told me I was dead to this family. I was angry. I'm your father, for God's sake. You owe me your loyalty. Loyalty is earned," I said. "And by the way, I'm filing for a permanent restraining order, based on her breaking into my workplace with a weapon, which is on the security footage, and your threats to freeze my brother's tuition. I've already spoken to a victim's advocate." Over the next week, the pressure mounted. The police discovered the commingled accounts my father had mentioned. They saw the debt. They saw the history of him trying to access my mother's trust. To them, it looked like a perfect motive. My father's entitlement had built the cage. I just had to shut the door. He tried one last dirty trick. He showed up at my brother's university, trying to convince the registrar that the tuition funds were fraudulent. He wanted to burn the bridge since he couldn't cross it. He actually stood in the bursar's office, yelling that he was the patriarch and had the right to veto any payments. He was escorted out in handcuffs for disorderly conduct. I watched the footage from the university's security cams. I had friends there too. Seeing him dragged out, screaming about his rights while his expensive suit was rumpled, was the first time I felt the weight lift off my chest. But the real revenge was yet to come. I knew how my father's mind worked. He thought he was untouchable because of his connections. So I decided to use the very thing he feared most, the truth. My father's business was a house of cards held together by a thin layer of social status and borrowed credit. To finish this, I didn't need a crowbar or a curse. I just needed to pull the right thread. Under the Fair Credit Reporting Act and standard corporate transparency laws, his investors had a right to know the truth about the assets backing their capital. I spent 48 hours compiling every email, every text where he admitted to using my brother's medical school fund as collateral, and every recorded threat he made to freeze a dead woman's trust. I sent it all, not to the police, but to his primary creditors and the few legitimate partners he had left. By Monday morning, his vision was a crime scene. His partners pulled out, triggering a series of immediate call-in clauses on his high-interest loans. He called me 30 times in 2 hours. I ignored them all until the 31st. "You've destroyed me," he hissed when I finally picked up. His voice sounded thin, ragged. "The bank is seizing the fleet. They're foreclosing on the house. I have nothing. Are you happy? You've left your father on the street. You weren't worried about my brother being on the street when you stole his future, I replied. You felt entitled to everything we had. Now, you're entitled to exactly what you earned. I'm coming over there, he screamed. I'm gonna make you sign over that trust. I don't care what I have to do. I'm not home, Dad. I'm at the mall. I'm working my last shift. I knew he couldn't help himself. He arrived at 1 a.m., screeching his tires in the empty lot. He bypassed the front locks, probably using the set he'd stolen from my stepmother's purse before she vanished. He burst into the north wing, his face a mask of pure, ugly rage. Give me the codes, he demanded, cornering me near the old department store. The lawyers say if I can show a liquid injection of capital, I can stay the foreclosure. Give it to me, or I swear to God. You're making a lot of noise, Dad, I said, stepping back toward the security gate. You should check the rules. Rule 4 is the most important. I don't care about your stupid rules. He stepped toward me, but stopped dead. The 7 mannequins were standing in a semicircle behind him. They hadn't been there when he walked in. They were silent, their featureless faces tilted toward him. One of them, the newest one, the one that looked like my stepmother, was holding the twisted crowbar. My father turned, his jaw dropping. For the first time in his life, he looked small. What is this? Some kind of prank? Who's moving them? They move when they see someone who doesn't belong, I said. And you've spent your whole life taking things that don't belong to you. I backed through the security gate and hit the manual override. The heavy iron shutters slammed down, locking him in the north wing. Open this, he screamed, rattling the bars. I'm your father. You can't leave me in here. The 3 a.m. chime is in 10 minutes, Dad. Just don't look at them. That's the rule. But we both know you never could follow rules if they inconvenienced you. I walked away. I didn't listen to the screaming. I didn't listen to the sound of plastic scraping against the floor or the sound of the wedding veil mannequin finally reaching out. I went to the office and waited. At 3 a.m., the chime rang. The next morning, the mall owners announced they were finally demolishing the north wing to make way for a warehouse. I did my final walkthrough with the foreman. The display window was full. There were 8 mannequins now. The newest one was dressed in a rumpled, expensive suit, its hands clenched into permanent plastic fists. My father and stepmother were officially declared missing, presumed fled to avoid their mounting debts. The court granted me full control of the estate. I paid my brother's tuition in full for all 4 years. I bought a small house in my name with locks that stay locked. Sometimes I think about that mall. I think about how some people spend their lives acting like they're made of something better than everyone else, only to end up as empty shells. It's bittersweet losing a family, but I've learned that blood doesn't make you a father. It just makes you a relative. Now, I sleep pretty well at night. I just make sure there are no mannequins in the room. Hope you enjoyed this story. If you want to see more content that'll keep you watching the shadows, make sure to subscribe. Unlike my father, I actually keep my promises. Stay safe, and remember, always read the fine print on your employment contract.